Good morning. Welcome to Stimson's panel discussion this morning on Taiwan's Southbound Policy. My name is Yuki Tatsumi. I'm a co-director of East Asia program at Stimson Center. Over the years, we had the privilege of hosting the up-and-coming Taiwanese scholar at Stimson in-house for a couple of months, during which time whoever he or she engaged in the foreign policy issues that are relevant to Taiwan, and also U.S. Taiwan relations and cross-strait. And this summer, we were very fortunate to have Professor Ping-kuei Chen, assistant professor from the National Chengchi University, who wanted to focus on how Taiwan's southbound policy under the Tsai administration may align with United States, our own free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, and what the policy implication might be. And he will speak about 20 minutes, summarizing his research while he's here. And then after that, because southbound policy and large focus of that is the economic activities and other engagements in Southeast Asia, I have a chance to show off the talent of my colleagues a little bit. So I'm happy to have the Brian Eyler to my far left, who's the director of the Stimson Southeast Asia program. He will say a few words about perspective from the Southeast Asia. So without further ado, Ping-kuei.
Okay. Thank you, Yuki. I would like to thank Stimson Center for giving me this opportunity to study here at Stimson. I found that this place is a very vibrant working environment, so I really enjoy my stay here. I'm going to talk about New Southbound policy and its implication on U.S. Taiwan relations, and I argue that New Southbound policy can be used as a costly signal to signal the intention of Taiwan's government's foreign policy intention. So today I'm going to let you know why I want to research this issue. Now we know that the foreign policy proposed by Taiwan always have some implication on U.S. Taiwan relations. If you look at Li Denghui's policy, Chen Shui-bian's policy, even Ma Ying-jeou's policy, they all have some implication about how stable U.S. Taiwan relation is. So the question is, since 2016, there has been a significant change in Taiwan's foreign policy when Tsai Ing-wen became president. What kind of impact it has on U.S. Taiwan relations? Is it positive? Is it negative? What's the effect? So this is the motive of my research. Today I'm going to talk about three main points. First, I want to focus on how the New Southbound policy is developed throughout 2016 and 2017, and why you see it that way today. It is a people-centered foreign policy, and the effect of that policy, the New Southbound policy actually will bring a costly signal to the U.S.-Taiwan relations. Now, I will explain why it is a costly signal, and then I will talk about how Taiwan wants to align its foreign policy with the new Indo-Pacific strategy. And I will have a little bit assessment of that. So if you look at the formulation of a New Southbound policy, it's not new, okay? We know there were Go South policy in Taiwan. So I'll talk about what makes it new later. This policy has been proposed even during when Tsai was running presidential election. So when he got inaugurated, she soon put the policy into practice. So there are a series of development of the policy in 2016. And finally, in 2017, that's the beginning of the implementation of the New Southbound policy. And the New Southbound policy focused on these countries. There are 18 of them. If you see the red color, it means they are key countries. There are 6 key countries. And you can see those countries used to have economic relations with Taiwan, somewhat interesting ties, except for Myanmar and India. India is a new market that Taiwan wants to explore, and Myanmar's newly democratized government give Taiwan an opportunity to go in Myanmar. So these are opportunities that Taiwan wants to explore. So what is New Southbound Policy? We have to remember the primary goal of New Southbound Policy is diversification. Okay, it's always trying to divert Taiwan's economic dependence on China to South or Southeast Asia. Now, as Taiwan tried to put this policy again in 2016, there are difficulties, and you see China is very sensitive to bilateral agreements, any bilateral agreements signed by Taiwan and other countries. So when Taiwan reached a renegotiation of bilateral investment agreement with Philippines, China made a very serious statement. So there are China's political influence and obstruction, of course, but also the Chinese business met some difficulties in local market. There are sometimes the local market is not very ideal for the investment. So there are some difficulties to push economic diversification. And you will see from the statement of Tsai Ing-wen, from the statement of senior official, from Southbound Policy's guideline work plan, you will see that there is a change, a little bit change, that Taiwan increasingly try to focus on people-to-people exchanges. So what are people-to-people exchanges? This is a very important point. I hope that anyone wants to know about New Southbound Policy, you have to acknowledge that it is a kind of a policy to engage people-to-people contact, building relations between civil society through NGOs or think tanks, develop cultural and educational exchanges, encourage tourist visits. So more importantly, Taiwan is trying to cultivate an understanding of Southeast Asia countries in its education system in Taiwan. Why is this special? Have you ever seen a foreign policy that does not only target at the foreign country, but also its own citizens? New Southbound Policy not only try to bring Taiwan to Southeast Asia or South Asia, it also try to bring these regions to Taiwan. Their culture, their life, the music they listen to, the lifestyle they're accustomed to, they want Taiwanese to know what Southeast Asia look like, so the Taiwanese can understand the region more. So some people say, this is a new article by Leonard Young. He argues that it is a socialization process. Although I wouldn't go so far to argue that New Southbound Policy is a socialization process. But you do see that the Taiwanese government try to ask its people to accept Southeast Asia. And I think this is important. This is something we need to pay attention to. Why? Because it seems that the government believes when people have contact with Southeast Asia nations, they will be more acceptable to Southeast Asia, and the Southeast Asians will be more acceptable to Taiwan. So essentially, Taiwanese people can imagine themselves to be part of Southeast Asia instead of East Asia. And I think that is important, right? So all the efforts of New Southbound Policy, as you can see, focus on this kind of soft issues, try to engage educational, cultural exchanges that help people to understand each other. So you can say the Southbound Policy is really non-political. It does not touch on any sensitive issue that China will challenge or respond to. And given that the New Southbound Policy is a soft issue-oriented policy, this is the main argument I'm trying to make. How does that impact U.S.-Taiwan relations? Now, before that, we have to establish several premises. Now, U.S. is the only third party who will show the willingness to defend Taiwan, and the U.S. will not participate in a conflict if it believes the conflict is provoked by Taiwan. This is important, right? Because China can always say, Taiwan did something to provoke the relationship, so China has to respond. But the fact is, it depends on the U.S. to assess whether Taiwan is provocative or not. So when we talk about the U.S.'s extended deterrence, we have to think about how U.S. perceive Taiwan's behavior. So in that sense, Taiwan needs to show the U.S. it is committed to no provocation. It is not trying to make provocative policy. And DPP in particular faced this problem because DPP essentially is a pro-independence party. It bears the responsibility to respond to independence movement. So Tsai's government actually faced a difficulty to show the U.S. government that Taiwan is trying to be self-restrained, Taiwan is trying to be moderate. So how does New Southbound Policy play into this? I argue that New Southbound Policy is a sunk cost. To invest in New Southbound Policy and to implement the New Southbound Policy actually is a cost that Taiwan is willing to pay to show you, the United States, okay, we're trying to do something here in Southeast and Southeast Asia, and we're not being provocative. This is a policy that you can be comfortable with. So you can see Taiwan tried a lot of things to reassure the U.S. Taiwan played a very low profile in the UN bid and WHA participation. The government didn't support the Olympic name-changing campaign right now in Taiwan. So the government is trying to show some restraint. And I think that really helps the U.S.-Taiwan relations. Now, why the New Southbound Policy can be a sunk cost? Sunk cost is kind of resources you mobilize to show your intent, show your foreign policy intent. The leaders cannot retrieve this kind of a cost. So there are two reasons I argue this is a sunk cost. First, you have financial resources invested in the New Southbound Policy. This is the budget allocated to different ministries. As you can see, most ministries have increased their budget in 2018 compared to 2017, except for Ministry of Culture. That's an interesting question that a lot of people talk about. But you may wonder, how much is enough, right? Is that a lot of money that Taiwan put in New Southbound Policy? It's never enough. We have to remember that the resources committed to New Southbound Policy only give a signal of the government's intention. Okay, we want to do this, and we are serious about it. But in terms of financial resources, the government can always appropriate different budget to different foreign policy initiatives. Let's say the UN bid. Okay, so the New Southbound Policy does not choke the government. Okay, it doesn't make the government short of money. However, if you look at the budget for foreign ministry, the total budget for New Southbound Policy in 2018 would take 27% of foreign ministry's yearly budget. So I think in that sense, you can say Tsai really wants to put some resources in foreign policy initiative. And you can see the senior officials in Taiwan try to coordinate between different ministries and try to really implement the New Southbound Policy. So from what the Chinese government has been doing, I think we can say that China is really serious about about New Southbound policy. And the other reason is the political cost China is willing to bear. So we know there are dark green groups in DPP who really advocate foreign policies that would seek international status. For example, applying for UN membership, applying for WHO membership, making the name of Taiwan in a variety of intergovernmental conferences. The New Southbound policy actually cannot satisfy any of them. And since Tsai's inauguration, you can see she was under a lot of criticism from the dark green group for not putting out foreign policy that they like. So you can say Tsai really bears the criticism from her own party to implement the New Southbound policy. You can imagine the New Southbound policy can change its direction. It can say, now we want to see a membership in regional dialogue, regional forums. But the New Southbound policy never tried to do that, okay? And the Tsai's government never say they're going to consider that as an option. So that makes Tsai really bears the political cost from her own supporters. If you look at her performance in foreign policy, the disapproval rate is rising and approval rate is declining. So if you are Tsai Ing-wen and you want to save this, you might as well put out some policy that your own supporter, your core supporters like. But she didn't do that, okay? So what does that tell us? It tells us that Tsai is willing to bear some kind of a political cost to show that Taiwan is not trying, it will not take provocative policy. Okay, so lastly, how does free and open Indo-Pacific strategy fit into this? We know that Taiwan, the New Southbound policy was proposed earlier, but ever since the administration announced the free and open Indo-Pacific, the Taiwan government has been very anxious to show its interest to be part of it, okay? And we can see the leaders talk in public. We can see senior officials try to say we are part of it. We can play a role. So a lot of people are trying to ask whether Taiwan can play a role in U.S.'s grand strategy. Now this is my brief assessment. I think given what we have seen so far, in the defense side, in the economic side, you can see the U.S. government would take a relatively passive role in economic cooperation. So if the New Southbound policy is about economic cooperation and Taiwan wants to cooperate with U.S. in third countries, that means Taiwan will have to propose a very clear proposal to the U.S. government that will interest the government officials and the American business. And then the Taiwanese business and American business can cooperate in a third country. But so far, we haven't seen a very concrete proposal coming from Taiwan. It doesn't mean it would not in the future, right? So in the future, we might see Taiwan try to propose something that U.S. may accept. But right now, I don't think the U.S. would take the initiative to tell Taiwan that, hey, let's do something in Indo-Pacific region. I don't think that would happen. Okay, so overall, I think the New Southbound policy is a good chance for Taiwan to signal its intent to side with the U.S. It makes Taiwan able to tell the U.S. that this is what we're doing, and our words have met with deeds. So So you can trust us. And the U.S. take it very, very, very gladly, you can say. So I guess a lot of people know that a few weeks ago, the White House made a very strong statement about El Salvador's breakup of relationship with Taiwan. That is unprecedented, I would have to say. That's very important. There are a lot of signals that shows the U.S. is willing to side with Taiwan and voice for Taiwan in international relations. So how does that happen? I think that has to do with Taiwan's foreign policy posture. And the new Southbound policy, even it is not designed to improve U.S.-Taiwan relations. I have to emphasize this. It is not designed to improve U.S.-Taiwan relations. But it has an effect to tell the U.S. that Taiwan is trying to implement something the U.S. desires. Okay? All right, thank you for your attention. I welcome any comments and questions. I'll try to answer the question as much as I can. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'll turn to Brian. You're up.
Sure.
For the actually, I'll go to him to say a few words before I go into the question and answers.
Thank you, Yuki, and thank you, Professor Chen, for this opportunity to provide comments on your report. I read through your report earlier this week. I found it very informative because I've been someone that's going around and talking about the potential connections between the new Southbound policy and Southeast Asia and the benefits in between. So I'm going to go over a few thoughts and then at the end kind of drop a slight criticism in the form of a question just to ask for more clarification. The softball, don't worry. New Southbound policy. Three goods. I think it's good for Taiwan. I think it's good for Southeast Asia. Is it good for the United States? That's something we want to think about. Thinking about how it's good for Taiwan. Well, as you point out, the new Southbound policy is a diversification program, and diversification is always a prudent strategy, I feel, particularly for a country in Taiwan's position. In terms of diplomatic diversification, engaging with Southeast Asia and the rest of the Indo-Pacific will provide opportunities to make new friendships, maintain old friendships, and I think that maintaining those friendships is kind of the best strategy forward, particularly because to some extent those states can speak for Taiwan in international fora, in business forums, etc. And Taiwan always needs to have voices speaking for it at the international level. In terms of economic diversification, as you pointed out, that China's investment-led model is now transitioning to a consumer-led growth model.
Yeah.
So that means wages are rising, it's more expensive to invest to gain return from China. And Taiwan early on was a driver of economic growth in terms of investment. But that's changing, and a lot of that investment sector has now moved into Southeast Asia. And the regional and global value chain is still linked up, it's still linked into China. But some of the downstream manufacturing opportunities are now in Vietnam, in Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia. And this is a smart move to develop new channels for investment from Taiwan into the developing world, particularly the developing world in its backyard. And also, Taiwan has several comparative advantages that it can continue to develop by investing in Southeast Asia. Advantages in tech, advantages in automobile parts manufacturing, and I believe advantages in energy development too, because there's a major energy gap that needs to be filled in Southeast Asia. But with this 20% of MFA annual funding being allocated towards the new Southbound policy, I would warn that money and then accompanying money from other ministries shouldn't be plowed into creating and naming new champions, but rather to develop a facilitatory environment that promotes the investment between Taiwan and ASEAN. Naming new champions can be a very costly venture, and we've seen plenty of examples of failures in the region, in Taiwan and China and Southeast Asia as well. And also, I think that bridging now to Southeast Asia, the people-to-people exchange aspect is one that, as you rightfully point out, will assist Taiwanese to realize, yes, we're kind of part of Southeast Asia. There are many similarities, whether it's similarities in climate, similarities in geography, similarities in the size of the economy and the power of the economies, if you will. But also, I think that by promoting Taiwanese tourism to Southeast Asia and vice versa, there are ways for Taiwan to associate itself with the Chinese diasporic communities in Southeast Asia that they'll quickly realize that, you know, there are real cultural ties here, more so than, say, tourists from China proper going to Thailand or Malaysia and developing associations with the diasporic communities there. I think new southbound policy is good for Southeast Asia. As I noted earlier, there's a major investment gap that needs to be filled, particularly in infrastructure investment, infrastructure and energy. And just as others are now targeting that investment gap, Japan, Australia, China's long been involved in filling that investment gap and has kind of developed a, well, not so reputable reputation as a good and responsible investor in the region. Taiwan can offer a new option for high quality investment. And there are ways for Taiwan to link up with some of these other development partners that are offering high quality options. Whether those options go from plans to actual projects is a different story. And again, that's about creating that competitive environment within Southeast Asia. And bringing more people to the table, more investment, more actors is a way to drive that competitive environment forward. Again, I think it's important to consider which sectors Taiwan would have the comparative advantages in. And I think energy is one of those. Mainland Southeast Asian countries are on the verge of what's called the renewable energy transition, or on the cusp of it. Not quite there yet, but very close. And making that transition away from fossil fuel dependence and dependence on hydropower projects that are ecologically damaging for the Mekong Basin, for Myanmar as well, and reduce economic value. And also the value of I would say, these projects have health costs as well, particularly with coal projects. It requires a lot of technical assistance in terms of power systems management. You know, how do you transition an actual power system, transmission, distribution, towards a smarter, more forward-looking architecture, and then provide, again, a landscape for investment in scale solar, scale wind, smart hydropower, cleaner versions of energy development. And I think that Taiwan, again, has a comparative advantage here, more so than, say, some of the larger countries that are making this transition. Why? Because Taiwan is still growing. Taiwan is kind of a middle income state. There are middle income states in Southeast Asia that are kind of growing at the same pace. Taiwan's a bit ahead of them. But those lessons that Taiwan learned were learned much more recently than, say, other countries that might be developing there. Is it good for the U.S.? Well, I think it's good because, as you say, the policy isn't provocative, right? It's kind of a soft policy, and it doesn't directly involve the U.S. So I think in terms of kind of providing a layer of vulnerability, or a layer of resilience that not involving the U.S. is a right way forward. So thinking about the Indo-Pacific strategy, the question would be how to link up with the Indo-Pacific strategies. And some of these strategies and programs are emerging. You know, as we sit here, there are a new slew of programs coming out of the White House, State Department, and Congress that could package together upwards of $60 to $70 billion to get involved in infrastructure development, particularly in Southeast Asia and the rest of the Indo-Pacific. Those strategies talk about linking up with Japan, linking up with Australia and other development partners. So there's an interest there, I would say, to link up with Taiwan potentially. But I don't think it's going to be easy. for the U.S. bureaucratically to link up with Japan's bureaucracy on some of these projects. So then it begs the question of
Taiwan included.
Taiwan included, right? So I think you get my point. So again, maybe the better approach would be to foster the competitive investment environment so that the private sector can get involved and governments can play the role of facilitating those linkages rather than leading the way. And also in Southeast Asia, there's been a lot of call for the U.S. to take a more strategic, high-profile set of actions in Southeast Asia, whereas in the past, truly the U.S.'s involvement in development and infrastructure has been very low-key. So as the U.S. moves, if the U.S. moves into a more high-key profile, there will be a vacuum that needs to be filled. And so that vacuum is like working on environmental law legislation drafting in Cambodia or in Vietnam. That's an area that Taiwan could step into. And that similar kind of capacity building, low-key zone that Taiwan could, again, engage in. Last comments on good for the U.S. and good for Southeast Asia is on people-to-people exchange. So if you watch China's moves in Southeast Asia, there's just been a huge volume of frequent people-to-people exchanges, whether it's educational exchanges, business-to-business exchanges, provincial governments to provincial government exchanges. They're happening all the time. And this is creating a deep and wide web of networks between China and Southeast Asia. I don't think this is a bad thing. But at the same time, we're not quite sure how those people-to-people exchanges pay off. So as Taiwan, as even the U.S. is considering reaching out to Southeast Asian countries, because the Southeast Asian countries are saying we need more of these people-to-people exchanges. That's how you foster this facilitatory environment. I think it's important to think about how do you measure the success. And you talk about this in your report, how to measure the success of people-to-people exchanges. And to demonstrate to, say, funding agencies that this is a way to invest in the future. This is a way to plant seeds for that future environment. I think the U.S. struggles with this. You noted the struggles that Taiwan has with proving that people-to-people exchanges work for diplomacy and work for economic development. So those are my comments on why this is good. In terms of criticism, very quickly, I would just love for you to answer this question. What do you mean when you say this is a costly signal? I was kind of confused by this. It sounds a little bit like political jargon, if you will.
Right, yes.
So if you could just let us know a little bit more on that. And then a second, you talked about the implications of this policy, but looking out further, what would be the kind of the medium-term outcomes and impacts of the new Southbound policy? Thank you.
Great, thank you, Brian. So I think I would first turn to Ping-kuei to give an opportunity to answer or clarify what you meant in your presentation in response to his two questions.
Yeah.
And then I'll open up the floor to others to chime in.
So quick clarification. So for the second question, are you talking about impact on Southeast Asia or impact on U.S. Taiwan relations?
Well, I would say let's say 15 years down the road or 10 years down the road, how does this really pay off for Taiwan?
For Taiwan.
Let's just
Okay.
think about Taiwan.
Okay. All right, so let me answer the first question, costly signal. It is the jargon in rationalist approach. So why do I think of this? Because I think the Taiwan always have to reassure the U.S. it would not do something that U.S. does not want. So it is very hard actually, because you can always say we will be peaceful. We will not provoke Taiwan's relations in Taiwan Strait. But your words have to be met with deeds. So Taiwan, especially for DPP, has to struggle with this. DPPs especially have this problem because there is a domestic pressure to press the government to put out more progressive policies, if I may say so. But on the other hand, if the DPP government wants to show its intention and its promise to the U.S. will be upheld by the Thai government, you have to do something. And I think New Southbound Policy represents this something. It is a policy that the Thai government really want to do, and it invests enough resources to do it. So it shows credibly. Now the important thing is the credibility here. If Taiwan's policy is credible enough to show the U.S. it is trying to maintain a moderate foreign policy, it is not going to divert its policy to other things like we're going to apply for UN membership next year, right? So Taiwanese government can always promise the U.S. government, Taiwan will not do this, do that, but how does that make the Taiwanese government credible, right? I think implementing New Southbound Policy, and as far as we can see right now, the Thai government really tried to implement this New Southbound Policy, and its focus. If you look at the content of New Southbound Policy, you will see that this New Southbound Policy really makes the U.S. government comfortable about what Taiwan is doing, and you can see the U.S. government actually agree with Taiwan's direction. You see Alex Wang made a comment about Taiwan's New Southbound Policy. That's probably the only public statement we can find issued by the U.S. government. And it is very positive. So the U.S. perceive this. So the U.S. can see what Taiwan is trying to do. And I think this is what it means by costly signal. It involves some cost for the Thai government. It doesn't really affect how the U.S. decides whether it wants to be friendly to Taiwan, but it shows the resolve of the Taiwan government. For the second question, I'm gonna be very conservative about that. All right, because in 15 years, we can see there are more people-to-people connection. It will be deeper. You will see younger Taiwanese generation know the region pretty well, a lot better than their parents. How much does that bring Taiwan a really good relations with each governments in New Southbound countries? I'm not sure. And I think it's premature to say the New Southbound Policy will be a failure, will be successful. The problem why I mentioned the lack of good metrics in my paper is because 15 years later, we will still be struggling to find a good metric to evaluate whether New Southbound Policy is successful or not. For those who really want to improve official ties with New Southbound countries, I think they will be very disappointed. But for those who want to have a vibrant connection between civil society and maybe economic relations, I think we can expect some result from that. Okay.
All right, great. So thank you for your patience. I'm going to open up the floor. Thank you for your patience. If you can, before you ask your questions, I'll ask this to everybody, to please identify yourself and which organization you're with, so that Professor Chen knows who he's speaking to.
Hi, my name is Cassie. I'm a program associate at the Osgood Center. So we know about the 2+2 dialogue that's going to occur with India, and I was wondering how you think Taiwan will play into these talks.
That's a curveball question.
Right. I really don't have enough information to talk about that. Right. My observation is that right now, India is not as interested to reach out to Taiwan as in, let's say, 2016. Okay. In the beginning of the New Southbound Policy, there was a hope that India would try to build tighter relations with Taiwan in order to say something to China, right? But that is no longer India's concern. So right now, the Indian government still wants to build cooperation with Taiwan, but not that enthusiastic. So I think it will be hard for Taiwan to join any regional forum or dialogue.
Do you have anything to add, Brian? Or?
No, not on that question, thanks.
And then Mike.
Chia Chen with United Day News Group. I have a question for Brian. So Professor Chen, is that okay? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Professor
that's
Chen mentioned that Taiwan government should provide a proposal to the U.S. government to link new Southbound policy with the Indo-Pacific strategy. I'm just wondering if you could provide from the U.S. perspective what kind of proposal would be attractive for the U.S. Thank you.
I think the right thing to do right now is for Southeast Asian countries, for Taiwan, or even China, to send delegations to the United States to figure out what this is, what's emerging right now. And a lot of these programs, they have names attached to them and acronyms. There's ITAN, there's Asia Edge, the Build Act. Build Act is something that we can see because it's a piece of legislation and it's very transparent. You can see exactly what that is going to be. But the other ones are still very much in the design phase, even though they've been announced. So now is the time to come and have those conversations about real needs within the Indo-Pacific so that U.S. stakeholders here don't get carried away and too overambitious or miss the mark on where those programs should target. So I think that's a critical development that needs to happen right now. And just looking back at the former administration, the Obama administration, the Asia Pivot started out as kind of a military policy or military-led policy towards the Asia Pacific. And there was a lot of worry and anxiety that came out of those initial announcements, not just from, say, China, who said, hey, this looks like a containment policy, but also from Southeast Asian countries because of a lack of clarity and a worry about how China would react then in Southeast Asian countries. And it wasn't until really 2-3 years into the pivot announcement that the State Department really realized that the big gains that can be made are from when we listen to what local countries need in terms of development needs, in terms of social, economic development, environmental needs, the capacity building that I was talking about earlier. And that really started to take off. Unfortunately, with the change in administration, we hit a rut, and now I think it's ramping back up. So that listening to local needs is probably the most important movement that needs to happen with the U.S. government right now.
I would like to add to that. Sure. Okay, let me add to that. I think when I mentioned Taiwan's proposal, I think it should be concrete enough to specify kind of industry, what kind of business, Taiwanese business and American business can all cooperate, in which country. And the proposal has to show that the American business can profit from this kind of project. And that will raise the U.S. government's interest. And I think Taiwan is fully capable of doing this kind of proposal. TAITRA can research and try to find the business or supply chain that can be created in the new Southbound countries.
Mike? Good to see you.
Good morning, Mike Macetic, PBS Online NewsHour. I mean, you've been talking about maybe how this plays out 15 years from now, but what about right now? I mean, the Chinese-U.S. tensions are increasing. Chinese tensions in the region are increasing, even around Taiwan with the increased militarization, exercises, etc. Where's the situation vis-a-vis China and their current assertive or aggressive policies that are going on and the ratcheting up of serious U.S.-Chinese tensions politically, economically, what have you.
Okay, so I think that's why I didn't focus on the success or failure of New Southbound policy itself right now, because it has only been 2 years, and I think it would be premature to judge its success or failure. Now, but if we look at U.S. Taiwan relations right now, or for the past 2 years, you can see a very good relations, right? And I think that has to do with the Southbound policy. Tsai focused on Southbound policy. That makes the U.S. understand that it's not Taiwan who provokes the tension in Taiwan Strait. It's China who has been assertive, trying to use diplomatic pressure or military pressure to coerce Taiwan. So as a response, you can see that the U.S. government is more and more willing to show its support to Taiwan in public. I think that is important. We have a lot of evidence to show that not only the current administration is very close to Taiwan, it is more and more willing to show the kind of a signal it did not want to show in the previous years, like few years ago. Okay, so I think that the immediate effect of New Southbound policy is that it actually brings a very close U.S.-Taiwan partnership, and I think this is exactly what Taiwan is looking for. Even though I have to say that again, the New Southbound policy is not designed to improve U.S.-Taiwan relations. Okay.
Gentleman in the back.
Hi, Brian Chang at the Asia Group. I would like to ask two questions. The first one related to that question about the U.S.-China tensions, and I'm particularly interested in the impact on Taiwanese manufacturing in China. We're told that at least some of that manufacturing is being shifted to Southeast Asia, but I would appreciate if you could quantify and contextualize that. So are we seeing whole factories being shipped off to Southeast Asia, or are we just seeing new investments being made in Southeast Asia rather than in China? And my second question would be regards to the Trans-Pacific Agreement, or CPTPP, and Taiwan's intention to join that. Do you think Taiwan really believes that it will be allowed to join that by China? Sorry if I phrase it a bit provocatively, but I would really appreciate your views on the prospects of that happening next year, or maybe sometime even in the more longer-term future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I don't have the exact number to tell you how many enterprises ship their factories to Southeast Asia. I believe maybe Taitra has this kind of number, but I haven't seen the government try to publish a number like that. Okay, as far as I know, there are some manufacturing industry in China. They are Taiwanese business, of course. They move to Southeast Asia. They don't just make new investment. They actually move because the deterioration of China's investment environment. Now, that actually happens a little bit before the New Southbound policy. So we can say, as I said in the paper, the New Southbound policy actually meets with the structural opportunity. It differs from the Go South policy in 1990s or early 2000s, because right now, the magnet of China is not that strong as in 1990s. So the government don't even have to encourage the business. The Chinese business will go south without government's encouragement. Okay, of course, right now government gives some incentives, so more and more businesses are willing to explore the market in South Asia and Southeast Asia. But even without government's encouragement, they will probably go to that market as well. And unfortunately, I can't give you concrete number. I would like to know that number too. Okay. Secondly, I can't speak for Taiwanese government. Whether I can only say that Taiwan really wants to join CPTPP, and that's mainly because Taiwan hasn't been joining any trade agreement for a while, and that really worries the administration. So CPTPP is of course an opportunity Taiwan wants to grab on. So if there's any indication that Taiwan can sneak in that agreement, Taiwan will grab that opportunity. I'm sure of that. About how much, like how big the chance it is, it's hard to say. You know, it's usually it usually takes a lot of diplomatic effort for Taiwan to actually join an economic agreement. And you probably cannot know that Taiwan is actually able to join until they announce the result. Because all the negotiation has to be under secret, has to be conducted secretly. Otherwise, if newspaper talk about Taiwan has a potential to join CPTPP, the CPTPP countries will immediately face pressure from China. So the Taiwanese government know this very clearly. They will want to keep as low profile as possible when they try to reach out any country when they try to make economic agreements. So I cannot say how big of a chance it is.
Thank you, Professor Chen. I'm Yun Sun. I'm the co-director of the East Asia program. Yuki is my better half. I have one comment and one question. My comment is about the social or the historical foundation of a closer tie between Taiwan and mainland Southeast Asia. And if you travel through Laos, travel through Thailand, and travel through Myanmar, because of the legacy of the World War II and the ROC troops and their diaspora in mainland Southeast Asia, a lot of the people still have family ties with people in Taiwan, and they still have very close, I would say, socio-economic relationship with their associates and their family members in Taiwan. And in these countries, when you talk to the people who are the descendants from this generation, the aspiration to develop a closer tie with Taiwan is very strong. That's my comment. My question is about, so throughout your paper, you very comprehensively give us a picture as for what the goal is, how it is contributing to Taiwan's foreign policy and the relationship with the United States. And one thing, the 800-pound gorilla in the room, is that how mainland China responds to new Southbound policy. And in our analysis, in our observation, the reaction from the mainland China does not seem to be particularly strong. And it could be because there's a very strong sense of contempt from China that, oh, but this is not enough money to compete with China's Belt and Road in Southeast Asia and South Asia. So I would like to ask you why there is not a strong reaction from mainland China towards this yet. Or maybe this is a specific or very smart, well-contemplated design by the Thai administration to avoid being provocative. And the follow-up question is that if China someday suddenly wakes up to the fact that, oh, well, this new Southbound policy is actually a foreign policy initiative by Taiwan, and they decide to go after it. So what would be an effective counter-strategy if that were to happen? Thank you.
Okay.
By the way, that was my better half in the East Asia program.
Okay. As far as I understand, there are two explanations. Since we don't have a lot of public statements on new Southbound policy from China, so we cannot be sure which one it is. First explanation, China doesn't care. China doesn't think new Southbound policy will be successful. It doesn't think the people-to-people contact or exchange will be a threat. It is confident that Taiwan is not able to develop any kind of official tie with with Taiwan, with Southeast Asian nations. Secondly, China think even if Taiwan try to develop economic relations with Southeast Asian countries, China is confident enough to control those countries. China is confident enough to exclude Taiwan anytime. All right. So so far, I can only tell you the evidence I got. I think the evidence I got in public is that China is more concerned with what Taiwanese government is trying to build relations with other governments. China still is not concerned about how civil society exchanges bring warmer relations between two countries, or how think tanks link have connections. China really cares about what's the reaction of NSP targets governments. So whenever Taiwanese government try to reach out the governments in NSP countries, China will react, and you can see China try to preempt in this regard, right? China made a series of memorandums or agreements or communiques with Southeast Asian nations to consolidate the claim to consolidate the sovereignty claim on Taiwan, and ask the Southeast Asian nations to abide by the One China policy. So you can see that China is trying to block, but not really hard. If it is going to be, is China going to wake up and and try to block any kind of connection with between Taiwan and NSP countries? I think it is possible, but I don't think in the next maybe 5 years China will start to do so. Why? Because I think so far the new Southbound policy has been soft enough that really doesn't raise any attention from the Chinese authority. On the contrary, Beijing put more attention on what the DPP is doing domestically or in Taiwan Strait. So they will react to those things, but in terms of new Southbound policy and all the projects it is doing, I don't think China would pay too much attention to it, because I think China is confident enough to focus on the internal politics in Taiwan, and they don't think they don't think blocking new Southbound policy will have an effect or a pressure on Tsai's government.
Okay. I know we're almost out of time, but you need to answer your first question about diaspora and KMT diaspora in the upland areas of Southeast Asia. You made a really good point about this area as a kind of zone of competition for the hearts and minds of those ethnic Chinese people up in the hills. And it's really, I travel through these areas quite often, and you're in northern Thailand and you go up into the mountains and you really feel like you've left Thailand. You're still in the borders of Thailand, but you go into a very much a Chinese community from the KMT soldiers that fled there during the 50s and 60s. And it's Chinese language, Chinese written signs, spoken. The signs are all written in traditional Chinese, not simplified because of the connection to pre-PRC China. And the words that are spoken are Yunnanese, because most of these people came from Yunnan province. So I think a really interesting study to do would be to look at that kind of, it's not a huge group that we're talking about, but to look at the competition between China and Taiwan over the years, and then because it's been going on for a while, and then to see how it's going right now, and then also asking the question of how are those upland ethnic Chinese identifying with the country that they are in, because I believe it's much easier to kind of become Lao if you're a Chinese migrant to Laos than it is to become Thai because of the stateless situation in Thailand. But so you raise a good point. That would be a fabulous study to look at.
Right.
Yeah, it's a very understudied issue. Nobody really pays attention to it.
I only have like maybe a couple of minutes left, so if you have any one last question any of you would like to ask, now is your chance. Or I think Professor Chen can stay behind a little bit after this, so if you want to ask, go up to him personally later on and ask him questions separately, you can do that too. So with that, thank you, Professor Chen, for a great study. Hope you had a wonderful experience with us. Hope you remain a Stimson family, and thank you everybody else for joining us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Sure. Yeah.
Good job.